Hey guys, welcome to 0.3 patch of POE2 for our Lich, which Chober Chaber build. This video is a little bit late with respect to when the league has started, and honestly it's just because I've been having way too much fun playing the game and going through all the contents on my own pace, so sorry for the delay on that one. I am working on a separate character that I think it's pretty interesting that I'll show you guys, maybe in some separate videos. But for this character, the Lich with Chober Chaber, I think with 0.3 she gotten a pretty good boost in power, specifically the offense part of it with all the great minion changes that GG has made in 0.3. So we're going to go over all of that detail. I think additionally, you might already notice, we ditched the Dark Defiler and now we have two-handed mace setup. We are actually now able to do this because of another great change from GGG, where they essentially lower the attribute requirements for both the skill gem and the weapons. So with that change, we're essentially kind of able to have high-level intel skill gems for minions, as well as having enough strength for two-handing these giant maces. One thing I do want to kind of call out really quickly, the footage here you're seeing is still the same character from last league. So I'm playing in standard league here, and we are playing essentially the intro level Arbiter difficulty. I was able to kind of farm the Citadel bosses reliably and pretty easily, honestly. So I farmed 2 out of the 3 keys, and last key I got off of trade just because I was a little lazy. And Arbiter here, I would argue honestly, there's a cliff in terms of damage output. If you look at this footage, you'll realize that I've never managed to kind of stun him enough to kind of actually use the Hammer of Gods. So I would imagine that if I optimize the damage output a little bit more, damage actually kind of goes through the roof, because if I'm able to kind of get his stun bar a little past 50% or 60%, whatever it is for Prime to stun, then we can chonk him for like a ton of damage for the Hammer of God itself. But with all of that out of the way, you can kind of see that for what maybe most people consider as quote-unquote completing the game, even without the Hammer of God, the damage is relatively comfortable. And if you know how to do the mechanics, which I'll have a mini Arbiter guide at the end of this video, I think should be relatively straightforward. So I think without further ado, enjoy the rest of the montage here. After this, I'll also have some T15 like level 5 Delirium mapping montage for you as well, to kind of get a sense of just how much better at mapping we are now with all of the changes. And then we'll get into all of the build details later in the video. Cheers!
Acquiesce, mortal immorality, coursing through time to find you.
Left for me to conquer.
All right, guys, now we are back in our hideout again, so we can kind of talk about the build in a bit more details. But before I jump into just kind of the changes that I made for 0.3, just a real brief recap for kind of the purpose of this build is that, you know, I really wanted to make this Chober Chaber work for the end game. Just kind of, I really find this hybrid archetype really interesting. The unique thing about this Chober Chaber, aside from the spirit that you get here, is the last line here, increases in reduction to minion damage also affect you, which allows you to take advantages of nodes on the passives or even skill gems, so that you know, you're double dipping the damage for both you and the minion. The idea is that you fight along with your minion on your side. And you know, the other key aspect of this is just that because the base damage for this Chober Chaber is really low, for you to really do endgame content, you really need something on your other hand to kind of compensate. So the previous iteration of this build actually was using Dark Defiler with gain 5% of damage as chaos damage per undead minion. And we were using essentially 20 plus minions of unearthed bone constructs along with about 10 you know, persistent reviving minions to get like a 30%. And that was, you know, so that's kind of the high level, the key idea of the previous build. So going into, you know, what I made changes for 0.3, you can see quite obviously that I got rid of Dark Defiler. The reason is that, you know, the gain damage as chaos damage is pretty respectable when you have all of your minions running around, but it's not feasible in the bossing scenario actually when you need more damage. In mapping, it's totally fine. But you know, again, in bossing scenario, you're not going to have 20 plus bone constructs running around. You're going to have about maybe 10 persistent reviving minions max, and you know, that's just, you know, 50% extra damage with a really low base damage mace. So what I did is I kind of swapped this away for just a giant chonker that you can kind of get on the trade. This mace cost me about 1 div on the like, you know, the standard league, but I would wager if you play this in the Abyssal League, you're gonna get like probably a better mace with the same price, just because you can do desecration there, so the crafting is more deterministic. And you know, with this change, essentially your damage output is actually a lot more consistent, and actually in the best case of the Dark Defiler compared to this, I think this still wins out. I can throw like a little Excel table calculation on the side if you guys are interested. Just some rough number. It's not very accurate, but ballpark estimation. But with that being said, right, then that comes actually a challenge for gearing, because you know, this thing generally requires about 300 to 400 strength, just because of the triple requirements from Giant's Blood. So even if you have like that, you know, 30 to 35% reduced attribute requirement on the suffix, it requires a lot of strength. But Chober Chaber also needs at least a minimum 300 int with 180 strength. So if you're really trying to satisfy the attributes here, you need, I don't know, 400 strength and 300 int. So unless you have, I don't know, hundreds of div budget for like Astromantis and all the other stat stacking, attribute stacking, it's not feasible. So the way that we get around that is actually by using this gauntlet. You might have seen this also in the build of the week a few months ago when they had like the Thor Titan, I think. But it's the same idea. The unique thing about this glove is that it lets you use strength as an attribute requirements for all your other melee weapons and melee skills. So your strength satisfies your 300 int requirement here. So you don't need to stack as much int, which is great for us. We only need enough int to have all the satisfy, like, you know, like the blasphemy or kind of your unearth or your kind of, you know, persistent reviving minion gems, which is great. So that's kind of the high level changes on the gear side. I also made an update on the Chaos Charm, just because, you know, if you notice, it's really hard to, the number of uniques we have on our gear is quite a lot. We have a unique helm, armor, and gloves. So it's really hard to stack your resistances as well as all the attribute requirements you need on the suffix side of things. In fact, you can notice that, you know, every single piece of my gear has the right suffix. There isn't any, you know, missed or like, you know, unused suffix slots. It's only a matter of getting the higher tier of the same suffix that, you know, we can kind of give ourselves a bit more breathing room. And in fact, you know, I have to slot in some runes on the sockets just to kind of cap our resistances. You know, we're barely over 75 for all resistances. So in that sense, I don't have a lot of space for chaos. So that's why we need, you know, like a chaos amethyst charm. This specific one also lets you recoup life, which kind of leans really nicely into kind of like the recoup mechanic that we've been building on the defensive side for this build to start with. So that's one other change on the charm. And then going back, again, for those maybe who are unfamiliar with, the previous video, we're using weapon swap for this secondary weapon set. I know it's weapon set 1. Secondary weapon set just to summon bone constructs. And in this case, I just got this one or this scepter off the trade, relatively cheap. All I'm looking for is plus level to minion skills and plus level to spell skills. And because Unearth is both of these stacks, so right now I have a like a level 27 Unearth running around. Yeah, so that's everything that I made in terms of updates to the gearing. Okay, so now moving on into the gyms side of things, you can kind of see here. Actually, quite a lot of changes, just because of all the support gem changes. So I'm going to have a giant table on the right side, kind of just list out all the gems for you if you don't want to kind of go through all the spiel. Yeah. So with that being said, right, we got rid of Earthquake. We are now using Sunder. The reason is just because you can do a ton of damage at a distance, and it's still considered a melee build, melee skill. I know this is, again, I'm playing this in Standard League, but I do have another character in the Abyssal League, so I totally understand, like, when you get, like, those Abyss, like, monsters and kind of those encounters in the map, like, shit gets crazy, right? So you really want to be kind of far away, again, especially since our defense mechanic is Recoup. We have about 4.5k health total. It's not quite a lot, especially given that I don't have any mitigation, right? This 1k armor doesn't mean anything. And Recoup by itself, right, is really kind of vulnerable against, again, like it doesn't recoup against dots or ground effects, and giant hits is also a danger. So that's why Sunder should be the skill when you have a lot of dangers. Kind of far away from you. Mapping scenario, you just have a bunch of bone constructs in front of you. They'll aggro the mob, and then you just sit in the back, like, sundering them. We have Rapid Attack, Rage, Magnified Area, and Cadence. All of that is, again, just so that you can kind of sit at a comfortable distance and just spam this. The secondary aspect is that this also further debuff targets with armor who are fully armor broken, that we'll get into in a bit. Rolling Slam's still here. This is still kind of our, bread and butter for like tough, rare monsters, or kind of bossing scenario that you saw in Arbiter when we cannot do our Hammer of the Gods. I made some changes to this, again, just to do more damage. Rage, Heavy Swing, Armor Break. This is Armor Break for bossing, and close combat, and bleed. Bleed is really just kind of something to give me a little bit more damage. I think this slot is a little bit, you can probably replace this with some other skill gem that also, again, just do a ton of damage when you're up close. Sesame Cry, the purpose is similar to before in terms of the combat loop, which I'm also going to have a little bit of a tooltip on the right side, or diagram, so nothing a lot changed there. Inferno Cry, same purpose. Hammer of the Gods, also the same. Yeah, Rage Forge, Concentrated Area, Heavy Swing, Fist of War, Exploit Weakness, just damage. The idea here is that you break the armor with Rolling Slam, and then you consume it with Exploit Weakness. In the first slam, I think the Aftershock with Sesame Cry at that point, honestly, I don't know if it gets this 40% bonus. But you will get a 10% bonus from the quality here in Powered Attack Aftershock, right? So it's relatively similar in terms of, so again, I think it's still doubling in effect in terms of the first slam and the second slam for bossing. On Earth here, I made quite a few changes. So, Feeding Frenzy, we can slot this in, Bone Construct minions, which is great. Prolonged Duration, self-explanatory. Physical Mastery, self-explanatory. This was just kind of me messing around a little bit, Auric Smelting. This just makes Armor Break a bit easier, especially, again, for higher tier when, you're not doing too much damage. It doesn't show here, but your Bone Construct's about, I think, like 3.5k damage with, when you're level 27, on Earth when you're summoning them. And Armor Break. So the idea here is that you just make a ton of bone constructs in the mapping scenario. You probably already saw in the previous montage. Go around breaking, consuming armor, and you are just kind of, like further away, just sundering everyone, further debuffing them, and then your brutes and your bone constructs just go and finish the job. So that's the idea for armor break and sunder. When you are bossing, you do not have these on Earth minions, so then you have the armor break with your rolling slam. And the idea there is that, again, you armor break them, and then you consume it with Hammer of the Gods to just deal a ton of damage. So you essentially, that's why I have armor break in different setups for different scenarios. Skeletal Brute. So I got rid of Lightning Mages here, just because I realized that level 20 anything, honestly, it's not doing a lot of work in T15 or beyond map when you juice up the enemies, when you juice up the mobs. So instead of relying on the skeletal like mages to do shock or whatever, I just decided to go with brutes. And the key thing I'm really trying to get from them is intimidate, which is a command skill. What does this say? Right, command intimidate and consume freeze. So we're not playing with the freeze part of it. That's fine, but intimidate, I think it's a debuff that lets the enemy take 10% extra damage, and they'll also deal 10% reduced damage. This is almost as good as shock, to be honest, and it's a bit more balanced in that sense, in terms of debuffing them both on the offense and the defense. So this is what I'm using the brutes for, and and the secondary benefit is that they're also pretty good at building up stun bar. I put brink on them so that they're not consuming it. That lets me just go ahead and consume the stun. Which, one more thing, sorry, I was going to say, is that 0.3 changed Seismic Cry. So now it can stun people a lot earlier. And again, this kind of builds into the synergy for Hammer of Gods for you to charge that up quicker, again, in the mapping scenario. So everything is actually a bit more synergistic in that sense, I would argue. And then, right, what about shock? Well, I think with the weapon, that's why this is a lightning damage. I think in bossing or prolonged durations, you'll still get a reasonable chance to shock people just based on like the lightning damage here. Not a lot, but I think, if you look carefully in the Arbiter footage, there are periods of time in which he was shocked, which, lets us do increased damage. So, reducing, getting rid of the Storm Mages, again, because you'll notice in the mapping scenario, I'm really relying on the bone construct to do a lot of damage because they're level 27. The Skeletal Bruise, again, just for debuff. That opens up essentially our spirit a little bit. And again, we will have a reduced spirit actually, going from 320 to 220 because we are losing the Dark Defiler. So again, like then I can't lean into the persistent reviving minions a lot anyway, so I just got rid of it. And we're slotting in Blasphemy, and this is a flex spot. Right now I'm running Enfeeble just for better survivability, but if you feel like you have enough survivability because you're not just leaning Recoup, or you have a larger effective health pool, go ahead and slot in Despair. Go ahead and slot in, I don't know, something else. Honestly, I think this and Despair are the only two because you're armor breaking them anyways. So the weakness one doesn't make a lot of sense. And Cannibalism, Magnify Area, Upswelling. This is a good one because this also applies to you, by the way. So most of the time I don't have full mana because I'm using, slam skills or even on Earth. So yeah, so all of that time my damage is increased, like 15, 9, 37, and then see, it dips down. So this is also good. And the other thing that I want to mention is that, again, because we're now going into like a two-handed mace setup, I don't have I don't need all of the extra mana stuff because I'm also getting rid of the gauntlet for this. So I don't have that much mana to begin with. So it does not make any more sense for me to take the 4th Ascendancy here for Black and Hard. I think generally speaking, you want 2,500 Black and Hard, 2,500 mana to get double 30% to get 60%, right? This is 30%. So if you think about it that way, if you have less than 2,500 mana essentially, and then you're investing 2 more Ascendancy points into this, you're getting less, you know, on a per point return basis versus the first two, which doesn't quite make sense. So I changed out that into Rupture to Soul, and this is just like a much better kind of like a crowd control, again, like mapping tool. You just have to be close. So obviously, you know, if you're oh, something stuck. If you're sundering around, you know, yeah, I don't know why this game needs to be optimized, but so if you're sundering around, maybe you're not close to, you know, the mobs all the time, but you know, you are still welcome to go in there and do some rolling slam, and then everyone is like debuff, and then, you know, you or your minion kill them, and then they explode for a ton of damage, and it just makes things a bit easier. Last thing here, elemental weakness. I was just using this to kind of I slotted this in for the Arbiter fight, and I totally forgot to use it throughout the whole fight, so skill issue. But this is, again, the flex spot. I think you can go like a few different ways here. You can, I don't know, swap in like an offering skill even, right, to kind of boost your bone construct and mapping scenario. You could swap this in for some kind of debuff and tie it to the secondary weapon set, so you're, you know, like when you have, you know, like when you're summoning, you know, like your bone construct, you can kind of like lay in the back, let the brutes do the work, and you can throw out some contagion or something like that. I'm honestly not sure, but this is open. Use your imagination. Actually, let me know what you think can actually be, you know, used here for just better compensate. But again, this is kind of the overall update to the gym list and the gears that I made, and honestly, I think these two really covers the offensive side of things. It makes things really comfortable in terms of mapping and bossing. Again, it's not like a one-shot off-map clear kind of a thing, but maybe in the realm of more ethical build, all of these changes, again, just made this character feel really functional. That, you know, with the where you still keep the minion synergy, but without the synergy, you still feel really good just by yourself, like, you know, dealing a ton of damage before your minion died. Last quick, you know, thing to cover on the passive tree changes. I already mentioned that we're, you know, taking out Black and Hard for Rupture to Soul just because we're not stacking mana with the gears that we have. Other thing is I made all of the small passive strength. Just because, you know, I already get enough intel on my gears, and you only need 147 intel just because, you know, again, your gym. You don't need any more than that. Everything else can be satisfied with strength. Here, the passive tree. Thank you very much, GGG, for a more polished minion set of skills. On this side, I find a lot more useful clusters. And there's a lot of things that, you know, a lot of options now, but I think what I decided to take is just this cluster right here, Embolden Lead, because again, this applies to you as well. If you've been hit recently while you're like in the middle of it almost all the time, even though you might, you know, choose to thunder a little bit away. So this is almost like buff all the way up, always up. The spell here is kind of missed, but not really relevant here, but you know, this is really good. And then take this entire cluster. This is tied to the weapon set that I use to summon, you know, bone constructs, but this whole cluster is extremely good for your, again, your bone constructs. Outside of that, I think honestly that's it. Yeah, you know, this is still Templar node. Like, this node is still sick. Like, take everything you can. And the other thing is now that, you know. Oh, right, and actually, before I forget, we are no longer doing Resolute Technique because the changes now, it just doubles your accuracy rating. I don't have a lot of accuracy to begin with. It's not really worth it. So I just, instead of pathing up there, I just path down here to take this new accuracy cluster that we have, equating strength to accuracy. And it's pretty good. I find that I almost never miss, and I really don't need anything else to kind of make accuracy better. One other thing is you'll notice for the weapon set where I'm running around with maces, I just kind of spec a little bit more into attack damage as well. This is, you know, by far the best single point investment in terms of, you know, increased attack damage you can get anywhere on the mace side of the tree. So take this, and I put a little bit more just for strength to kind of get to where I need to be. Yeah, so I think any outside of that, everything is still pretty similar. We're still taking the Recoup cluster here. Here, Pliable Flesh does not change, and Fused Flesh here as well. One thing I'll say is that I think this cluster is kind of bait. If you really look, it's pretty specific, like increased physical damage. I don't know. Okay. So this node is pretty bad. This node, might be good, but I don't find myself needing that essentially, right? Like I just feel like between with this node and without this node, I don't know. I feel like my Recoup is pretty good. And just a bit of a reminder, we are still utilizing like the bypass mechanics. So I have 5% bypass here, 10% bypass here, and there are 10% on my helm. So again, we are taking when we take damage, both our ES and our health pool is taking split portions of that. So when we do the recoup from the mantle, we are getting recoup from both sources. So if you look at my recoup, 67% plus 20 and 20, 87. If you divvy that out, we are over 100% recoup for actually both our ES and our life. Chaos damage notwithstanding, we have this to help a little bit as well, even though it will damage our energy shield by double the amount. But yeah, so that's kind of I was trying to go a little bit quick there because again I just want to be cognizant of time. I don't want to. This is just more of an update, but just for some newer folks as well. But yeah, this is kind of the overall updates. The details I'll have on updated Mobalytics. And if you have any other questions or suggestions to make this better, please feel free to drop them in the comments. Okay, so that was kind of the build details and the updates that I've made. I do want to quickly talk about like a few things that I actually tried in the 0.3 update that they included are new things that maybe on paper it felt synergistic, but I think in the end I didn't decide to go with. I think it's specifically two different skill gems. One is the Ravenous Swarm, this one. I was playing around with this a little bit, assuming that it would get the bonus from the all the minion damage nodes. Honestly, I think the tooltip, even in combat, does not actually show the actual numbers for the damage. So if somebody can let me know how to find that, that'd be great. It only shows like the percentage modifier of increase, so it's like 406% or something like that. And what I noticed is that the damage is okay, it's not that great, but it was really good at poisoning enemies. So to me, I think this is probably a lot more useful for maybe I don't know, some kind of Pathfinder, or I'm not really familiar with those kind of builds, but I see on content creators like Pathfinder concoction or poison builds or whatever. Maybe it's because just kind of poison all of the enemies around you to kind of get that debuff and consumption chain going. So it's not fully relevant for this build unless we want to kind of rework a little bit towards that. So that's why I didn't use this. The other thing that I also tried to limited success is I think there's a support called Skittering Stones. Let's see. This one right here. 2. This one's kind of interesting, so I'm going to go through the details a little bit. Support skills which create shatterable earthen objects. After killing enough enemies in range of these objects, they will shatter, releasing Skittering Stone minions. So this, as far as I know, I think it supports 3 skills, 2 of which I know off the top of my head is the Earth Shatter and the like the Thor hammer throwing skill. What is that, like Molten Hammer or something like that? Which one is that? I think it's Forge Hammer. There you go. The minions are actually not bad, and on paper again, maybe actually some synergy between kind of like the mace offense skills and minion, which is exactly what I'm looking for. But what I realized is that the conditioning for triggering this is really strange. Earth Shatter, as an example, you just do like a cry to trigger it to break the objects, but now you need to make the Earthen Spike or get that Forge Hammer thrown, and then you need to kill things around it, and then it shatters by itself automatically, so you don't need to do the cry anymore. And then the minions come out as well as you get, I think, your original shatter effects. This is kind of weird. So I mean, like I think if I were to build this in some other way, I can definitely take advantage of it, but with the way that the build is going right now, with all the unearthed like bone constructs I have, I this is kind of, I don't need another way to do crowd control essentially for minions, and I rather just be kind of sitting afar doing like Sunder or Rolling Slam. rather than kind of, taking the time to do Earth Shatter or Forge Hammer. So, and, also additionally, this really doesn't benefit. So in the mapping sense, it's not really beneficial. And in the bossing sense, it's not really relevant, especially if it's, I don't know, Pinnacle boss with like just a boss by itself. You can't trigger it anyway. So, so those are just kind of the two things that I try, Skittering Stone and Ravenous Swarm, that, I thought maybe there's some synergy, but there isn't. Volatility was also the other thing I looked into, but again, we're not doing crit, so there's no reliable ways to stack. I know there's some nodes on the tree that lets me gain volatility when my minions die, but I think that by itself is not really going to give me enough sustain to warrant like the investment on the passive tree side, especially because we're really short on points there. Yeah, so again, there are some interesting tools that GG have kind of like introduced in 0.3 for minions, but I really feel like the melee minion archetype is still missing a lot of things, and not really blaming GGG for it. And I think the sole reason is just because we don't have a Templar, nor do we have the Druid class ready, essentially. So honestly, I would actually expect the ceiling for this class to skyrocket once we have those, and at that point, it might even warrant or like starting a new character where we do not use the Lich anymore. I would expect, some of the Ascendancy type with Templar specifically would be a much better suited for Chober Chaber as an item. But yeah, just wanted to share with you guys maybe more freeform thoughts in terms of other things that I've tested. When is the next patch where we expect like a relatively significant update in terms of the ceiling for this build. And I think with that, it kind of takes me to a conclusion here. Generally, this is my first character that I kind of showcase on YouTube, but as a rule of thumb, I like to talk about builds that I enjoy playing. And honestly, I think, this build, I'm a little bit kind of burnt out in terms of playing with it. I really do want to move on to some new builds. This, especially, back in 0.2, it took me about a month, just every day, spending whatever time I have trying to figure out like the optimization for this build. So I think, yeah, with this update, I'll probably just kind of put this character on the shelf a little bit and kind of work on the Abyssal League Witch Hunter that I'm working on. Seems like a popular build, but I'll try to put some unique spin on it, and again, try to keep the build as ethical as possible. So I'll update you guys on that one. But again, for this build, I think, yeah, we'll probably not have another update on this until they release the Druid or the the Templar side and update a lot in terms of the skill gem and the passive kind of synergy and all of that. So yeah, again, really appreciate everyone who's kind of gone through this character and taken through this character's journey with me. And yeah, so for now, we're going to put her journey on the shelf, and we'll look forward to some new builds for the Witch Hunter in the Abyssal League in the future. Thanks so much. Alright guys, so here is just like a super mini quick guide on the Arbiter, specifically Phase 2, when he has that wombo combo, really frustrating set of attacks that he kind of chains together. So you'll see that on the screen here, I have a step-by-step kind of sequence of when you should be outside the circle and when you should be inside the circle, and the timing associated with each to kind of avoid that entire sequence of attack. And frankly, that's the most annoying part. So if you can get that reliably done, I think honestly you're pretty much good, right? Just keep in mind, this is just the standard or Arbiter. If he has other attacks in like the Uber version, I don't know. Sorry, I can't help you with that one. But coming back to the standard Arbiter, outside of this one that I just showed, the most complicated wombo combo, everything else is relatively straightforward, and you can probably also refer to some other sites for the guide. And I will also say that once you're familiar with it, especially in the first phase where he's doing the corridor and like that sequence of exploding donuts, so you have to run from donut to donut, take advantage of sprint when you can. In fact, if you go back to the intro montage, you actually see me sprinting from donut to donut. You kind of have to get adjusted in terms of like the starting sprint animation, the ending sprint animation, where you still go a little bit over, make sure you don't fall out of the donut. But once you get that done, I would say that you can probably get away with even lower movement speed. The boot that I have on is 30%.
and you can see that I'm relatively comfortable in terms of moving around, right? So, you know, some practice and stuff like that will allow you to kind of compensate on deficiencies in your gear in terms of clearing this Arbiter. Yeah, that's it. And, you know, some of the other attacks, again, just on the regular version of Arbiter, you can see that I try to avoid, or sometimes I just straight up tank them with the Recoup. You don't have to worry too much about it. It's just, you know, you just got to be mindful of your health and know that when you should tank his hits to get some damage in, or when you should leave. And the other thing is that the nice other thing about Recoup is that you don't have to chuck your flask, right? You take a hit, get out a little bit, and then you're full life and shield again. So yeah, I really hope this helps. This last wombo combo was the most frustrating thing I have to deal with, so hopefully you don't have to go through that. And yeah, best of luck beating Arbiter.